The wind never stopped in Amarillo, Texas, but that morning, it carried something different. 16-year-old Sawyer Lane stood alone by the barn, his hand resting on the belly of his silver mare, Echo. The vet's words still echoed in his mind. She's carrying twins, and it could kill her. Terminate one, they said. It was the safest option. But Sawyer didn't believe in safety. He believed in Echo. In a world full of doubt, he chose faith. And what followed would silence even the loudest critics. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The sky above Amarillo, Texas, was a soft watercolor of dawn, pale blue stretching over flatlands where wind moved like memory through the wheat. The chill of spring still clung to the ground, but the air hinted at something blooming. In the quiet of Lone Creek Ranch, 16-year-old Sawyer Lane stood beside the weathered barn, his hand resting on the warm flank of his silver Mustang, Echo. Her breath misted in the morning cold, steady and unbothered, unlike the storm gathering behind Sawyer's tired green eyes. Sawyer was lean, with a wiry build shaped by years of farm work, his tanned skin dusted with freckles that only deepened under Texas sun. His hair, the color of wheat in July, was usually messy under a trucker hat. But it was his silence that set him apart, thoughtful, stubborn, and full of a kind of stillness that had nothing to do with shyness. Since his father passed a year ago from lung cancer, Sawyer had changed. He laughed less, he prayed more, and he poured every thread of his soul into Echo, the last living thing on earth that felt like his dad. Echo wasn't just any horse. She was wild once, rescued from a failed roundup when she was barely old enough to stand. Now 10 years old, she was magnificent, silver gray with a white blaze down her nose, her mane thick and wind-tossed. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and oddly knowing. Echo wasn't the easiest animal to love. She kicked, tested boundaries, hated strangers. But with Sawyer, she was calm as dusk. That morning, Echo wasn't herself. She stood apart from the others, her belly swollen with a weight Sawyer didn't want to name. Her breathing was heavier, her appetite erratic, which was why Dr. Hellman was on his way. The vet's truck pulled into the gravel drive with a rumble. Sawyer glanced toward the porch where his mother, Sarah Lane, stood with a mug of black coffee, her eyes already locked on him. Sarah was in her late 40s, tall and slim, with long auburn hair she always tied back with a worn leather band. Life had given her more sorrow than comfort, losing her husband, watching a son harden into quiet grief, but she bore it with a resolute calm, like someone too tired to break. She didn't smile much these days, but she tried. With neighbors, she was kind, polite. With Sawyer, she walked carefully, like someone tending a wounded hawk, never pushing too hard, always hovering just close enough to catch him if he fell. Dr. Hellman emerged from the truck, slamming the door shut. A tall man with a solid frame, gray stubble, and boots that had seen more barn floors than sidewalks, he carried an old leather bag and a no-nonsense air. He had been coming to Lone Creek for 15 years. He'd vaccinated every foal, stitched every wound, and cried in the truck after the Lane family dog had to be put down. "Morning," he grunted, tipping his hat. Sawyer nodded. "She's over there." Echo stood still as he approached, eyes alert. Dr. Hellman knelt beside her, running a practiced hand along her belly. He pressed his stethoscope to her side, listened, then moved it again, his brow furrowed. "Hold her steady," he said. Sawyer obeyed, gripping the worn rope gently. His heart pounded with the rhythm of Echo's breath. Dr. Hellman pulled away slowly, not meeting Sawyer's eyes. "She's pregnant." Sawyer blinked, then smiled. That's good, right?" "Yes and no," the vet replied, his voice low. "She's carrying twins." The word fell like thunder in the open air. Sawyer's grip tightened on the rope. "That's rare?" he asked. "Very," Dr. Hellman said. "Dangerous, especially for a mare her age." Sawyer looked at Echo, who continued chewing hay, seemingly unaware of the doom that had just been spoken over her. "What are the odds? She could lose both foals, could lose herself. The strain's too much." A silence followed, long and heavy. "There is a safer option," the vet added. "We can terminate one embryo. It increases the survival chance of the other, and most importantly, Echo." "No," Sawyer said sharply. The word came fast from somewhere deep. "Sawyer, no." He stepped between the vet and his horse. "She can do this. She's strong. She's always been strong." Dr. Hellman stood, his face unreadable. "Son, I'm giving you the medical truth. What you're asking of her is risky. It's not about courage, it's about biology. I trust her more than I trust numbers, Sawyer said quietly. The vet sighed, packing up his stethoscope. I'll respect your choice, but be ready. This won't be easy. Sawyer watched him drive away, the tires kicking up dust on the ranch road. Later that morning in the kitchen, the tension thickened like humidity before a storm. The small farmhouse smelled of cinnamon and wood polish, the walls filled with photos of a time when smiles came easier. You're sure? Sarah asked, her tone careful. Sawyer didn't look up from his scrambled eggs. Yeah, she sipped her coffee. The vet? I don't care what he said. Sarah exhaled. Sawyer, it's not just about Echo. It's about you too. If something happens, then I'll be with her. Sarah put her mug down. Her voice dropped, filled with the ache she tried to hide. You've already lost one parent. I can't watch you fall apart over a horse. Sawyer stood abruptly. She's not just a horse. His voice cracked, and for a moment, everything in the room stilled. She's all I have left of him, he said, softer now. Sarah didn't speak. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. It was calloused, warm, motherly. The kind of touch that says more than words can bear. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing clouds across the sky like herds of white cattle. Sawyer glanced out the window toward the pasture, where Echo grazed slowly beneath a mesquite tree, her silver coat glinting under the rising sun. Whatever came next, he would not abandon her. Not now, not ever. Spring in Amarillo was never still. The wind, relentless as memory, swept through Lone Creek Ranch with the force of something ancient. It whispered through the wheat, rattled the windows, and tugged at the loose boards of the barn. By late April, the fields were painted gold, and the air carried the thick scent of wildflowers and coming rain. But within the old wooden walls of the Lane family barn, the atmosphere was tense. Every breath Echo took was heavier, every movement slower. Sawyer Lane had turned the back corner of the barn into a sanctuary. Not just a stall, but a haven. He'd cleared out old tools, patched up loose boards, and layered the floor with fresh straw, thick woolen blankets, and cedar shavings to keep the scent clean. Above the stall, he strung up 2 old lanterns that bathed the space in warm amber light. On the far wall, he painted a small white cross, a quiet symbol of hope. Each morning before chores and each night before sleep, Sawyer documented everything. Echo's appetite, her breathing rhythm, her posture. He had a leather-bound journal filled with notations, check marks, and question marks. Sometimes he used a flashlight to read veterinary guides or scrolled through dusty ranching forums online. When that wasn't enough, he made calls to horse breeders from Wyoming to Tennessee, who often seemed surprised to hear a teenager on the other end of the line asking detailed questions about twin foaling. But even with all the knowledge Sawyer gathered, it was the unknown that kept him on edge. Echo, once spirited and bold, had become reserved. She moved cautiously, as though each step had to be negotiated with the ground. Her belly now looked impossibly round, her breathing slow and deliberate. The other horses gave her space, especially Charlie, the ranch's border collie who followed Sawyer everywhere. Charlie was 6 years old, with a tricolor coat and one torn ear from chasing a barbed wire rabbit years ago. He had a soldier's devotion to Sawyer, always at his heels or sitting just outside Echo's stall. That evening, clouds rolled in faster than usual. The sky shifted from pink to steel gray within minutes, and the temperature dropped with it. Sarah Lane stood on the porch watching the horizon, arms crossed, lips tight. Her auburn hair was pinned back, a cardigan draped over her shoulders despite the humid air. She hated storms, not just because of the danger, but because her husband, Will, had passed during a storm almost exactly 1 year ago. Since then, thunder sounded like grief in her ears. Sawyer had just finished checking Echo's water bucket when the first crack of lightning lit up the barn rafters. He closed the stall gate and whispered, "You're doing great, girl," as Echo shifted her weight and let out a long breath. The wind screamed outside, slamming the barn door shut with a bang. Sawyer jumped, his flashlight flickering. Then he heard it. The unmistakable sound of hooves slipping, a deep thud, and a sharp, muffled grunt. "Echo," he shouted, dropping the flashlight and bolting through the dark. His boots slid across the wet wooden planks as he reached her. She was on her side, legs twisted beneath her, the massive weight of her pregnant belly pinning her down. Her eyes were wide with panic, nostrils flaring as she gasped for breath. Sawyer's voice broke as he knelt beside her. No, no, no. Stay with me, girl. He pressed his hand to her shoulder, feeling her muscles twitch under his palm. Echo tried to move, her hooves scraping helplessly against the straw. Charlie barked wildly from the barn's entrance. Sawyer turned toward the door and shouted over the wind, "Mom, I need help." Within seconds, Sarah appeared, flashlight in hand, her cardigan soaked through. She didn't ask questions. She ran to Echo's side, dropped to her knees, and looked at her son. "Tell me what you need. Help me brace her legs. She can't get up like this." They moved together instinctively. Sarah slid a blanket beneath Echo's flank, Sawyer pressing against her shoulder to keep her from thrashing. Echo grunted, her breath coming in hard, shallow bursts. Sawyer looped a halter around her neck and used it to coax her forward. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "You're stronger than this." Rain pounded the roof like galloping hooves as the storm hit full force. Minutes felt like hours. Echo struggled, tried to rise, collapsed. Sarah's hands were trembling, but her voice stayed calm. "Again, sweetheart, pull on my count. 1, 2, 3. Together, mother and son pulled as Echo pushed with what little strength she had left. Then, with a final, desperate surge, Echo rose to her knees, then her feet, legs shaking, chest heaving. She wobbled, steadied herself against Sawyer's body, and let out a long, exhausted exhale. Sawyer cried, not loudly but enough for Sarah to notice. She reached for him, her hand landing softly on the back of his neck. "She's okay. You did it." "No," Sawyer said, eyes still on Echo. "We did." They led Echo gently into the padded stall. She collapsed again, but this time into the warmth of safety. Charlie curled beside her, tail thumping once against the floor. After everything, the storm still roared outside, but inside the barn was silence, a sacred pause. Later that night, Sawyer found his mother sitting on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her tea forgotten beside her. He sat next to her, neither of them speaking at first. "You remind me of your dad," she said finally. Sawyer looked at her, surprised. "I do?" He was the same way, quiet, stubborn, always trying to fix what he couldn't control. "He would have been proud of you tonight." Sawyer didn't respond right away. Then he whispered, "I miss him." Sarah nodded. "Me too." They sat together as the wind finally began to die, the storm drifting east, leaving the air fresh and charged with promise. The days after the storm passed in a breathless hush, as though the land itself were waiting. The skies above Amarillo stretched clear and cloudless, the wind softened to a whisper that curled around the barn and slipped through the grass like a ghost. The air smelled of damp soil and distant thunder, the aftermath of something powerful, but unfinished. Sawyer Lane hadn't left the barn in 3 days. He slept in the straw, ate sandwiches his mother brought him, and washed his face with rainwater from a barrel outside. His world had narrowed to one small corner of the ranch, Echo's stall, where time moved slower than it did anywhere else. Echo had survived the fall, but she was different now, more guarded, her body heavy with the weight of impending labor. Her breathing was shallow. Her gaze stayed locked on Sawyer, as if silently asking, "Will you be ready when I am?" On the morning of the 5th day, Sawyer noticed the shift. Echo refused food, circled the stall 3 times, then lay down heavily in the straw. Her tail flicked, her sides rippled, the contractions had begun. Sawyer jumped to his feet, heart racing. "It's time," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Charlie, the border collie, barked once from the stall entrance, and then lay down, tail sweeping gently across the dirt. He would not leave either. Sawyer opened his leather-bound journal and scanned the scribbled notes he had copied from veterinary books. Contractions every few minutes. First fall usually comes in under an hour. But notes didn't prepare you for the sound. Echo let out a deep, guttural groan that shook Sawyer to his core. He knelt beside her, placing one hand on her neck, the other ready to guide. He had gloves, clean towels, iodine, everything he'd read he might need. Hours passed like water through clenched hands. Then at last, hooves emerged, slick and trembling. Echo strained, legs quivering with exertion. Sawyer pulled gently, and soon a wet, glistening foal slid into the straw. "A colt," he gasped. "You did it, girl. You did it." The colt stirred, let out a sharp, sweet whinny, then wobbled onto his knees. He was dark, nearly black, with a small white mark in the shape of a flame between his eyes. Sawyer smiled through tears. "Flint," he said softly, "that's your name." Echo barely had a moment of peace before she groaned again. Sawyer turned, her sides convulsed, her eyes wide. The second was coming. But something was wrong. The hooves didn't come first. Instead, a single leg, then nothing, then another, twisted backward. Sawyer's heart plummeted. Breech birth. No, he whispered. Please, not like this. He placed his hand inside gently, carefully. Just as he'd read, he felt the awkward angle, the way the foal had turned wrong. He tried to adjust it, but Echo screamed, her body tightening, pushing. Outside, the wind picked up again, as if sensing the struggle. Charlie whined. Sawyer's hands trembled. Mom, he called, but it was past midnight. Sarah was asleep, and even if she came now, she wouldn't know what to do. He was alone. Echo strained again, her entire body arching in agony. Her breath came in gasps, her lips foamed, her eyes wild. Push, girl, Sawyer whispered, eyes burning. One more time. Echo bellowed and gave everything she had. And then, with a final convulsion, the second foal came free. She was smaller than Flint, her legs curled tight, body limp. Sawyer froze. She wasn't moving. He fell to his knees, pulled the filly into his lap. She was soft and still, her chest silent. No, don't you quit on me, Sawyer whispered, rubbing her sides. He cleared her nostrils, shook her gently, rubbed again. Nothing. He buried his face into her damp coat. Please, he sobbed. Please don't leave her alone in this world. A small gasp. He jerked back. Her tiny lungs flared, her mouth twitched, then another breath, and another. The filly shivered and let out the weakest whinny he had ever heard. Sawyer laughed and cried at once. He cradled her close, breath shaking. Rain, he whispered, staring out at the wet fields beyond the stall door. Your Rain. Echo collapsed in the straw, utterly spent. Flint nuzzled her side. Rain lay beside her brother, breathing but fragile. Sawyer didn't move for a long time. He stayed curled beside them, one hand resting on each new life, tears drying on his cheeks. It was the first time he had wept since the day they lowered his father into the earth. Hours later, as the sun crept over the hills, Sarah stepped into the barn, boots soft on the floor. She gasped at the sight. 2 foals, Echo asleep, Sawyer dozing upright beside them. She said nothing, just sat beside her son and placed a thermos of hot tea in his hands. Later that day, Sawyer grabbed his phone. He didn't post often. He didn't care much about social media. But this felt holy. He filmed for 30 seconds, Flint and Rain side by side, wobbling around the stall, Rain blinking into the sun. He posted it with one line, Miracle Twins, born of storm and wind. The morning after the twins were born, Lone Creek Ranch felt sacred. Dew clung to the grass like tiny prayers, and sunlight streamed through the cracks in the barn wall like blessings made visible. Flint, bold and unsteady, kicked at a loose blanket in the stall, while Rain, delicate and curious, stood closer to Echo, leaning into her mother's warmth. For Sawyer Lane, the moment still didn't feel real. His hands were still sore, his back stiff, but his heart had never felt more alive. He never expected what would happen next. The video, the 30-second clip he posted of Flint and Rain stumbling across straw, blinking at the world like it had just been painted, was meant for family. He hadn't even added hashtags. Just a caption. Miracle Twins, born of storm and wind. He uploaded it before going back to sleep on the barn floor. When he woke up 5 hours later, his phone had over 300 notifications. By sunset, it had over 1 million views. The first call came from Travis Kincaid, a local journalist from the Amarillo Sentinel. Travis was in his late 30s, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, jeans pressed with military precision, and a voice built for radio. He was polite but persistent, and within hours a crew showed up at the ranch. They were followed by others, regional, then national. Morning shows, online magazines, animal rights blogs. The term Miracle Twins trended for 2 straight days. Sawyer tried to manage it. He gave one interview, standing stiffly in front of the barn with Charlie by his side and Flint sniffing curiously at the camera tripod. But he hated it. He hated the lights, the questions, the way people treated Rain like a trophy instead of a miracle. He saw cell phones flash like lightning through the fence, strangers showing up without permission, reaching out to pet the foals over the rail, some even climbing it. Sarah watched it all with concern. She'd seen fame before. Her older sister had once gone viral for a charity quilt auction, but this was different. This was Sawyer's world, and it was being swallowed up. She stayed calm. She always had, even when she wanted to scream. That was her way. Tall and thin, her shoulders always pulled back, voice never louder than it needed to be. She was kind, especially to strangers, but protective when it came to Sawyer. Losing her husband had made her guarded. Now, with the twins, she sensed another storm brewing, just one made of microphones and curiosity. "Maybe this isn't all bad," she said one morning as Sawyer slammed the barn door shut after yet another group of uninvited visitors tried to take selfies with Echo. "This kind of attention could change your life." Sawyer scoffed. "Change it into what? A zoo?" Sarah leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, her voice steady. "Into something bigger. Maybe even something better. People are seeing something they needed. Hope. Survival. That matters." Sawyer didn't respond. But later that night, he walked to the pasture and stood watching the sky fade from pink to lavender. Flint ran wild in circles, tail high. Rain followed at her own pace, slower but never far behind. That was when the email came. Juniper Beck, senior editor at Pine Bend Publishing, sent it directly to his inbox. She had shoulder-length silver blonde hair, cat-eye glasses, and a signature that included a lowercase quote, "Tell the truth, even if your voice shakes." She'd seen the video. She wanted Sawyer to write a book. He read the message twice before closing his laptop. The next day, a UPS truck left a small box at their gate. Inside was a hardcover memoir about a boy and a rescue dog during a wildfire, along with a handwritten note from Juniper. "You don't have to write a perfect story, just write the true one." Sawyer didn't reply. He didn't know how. The ranch, once a quiet place where the loudest sound was wind in the wheat, now buzzed like a summer fairground. The gate was no longer enough to keep people out, so Sawyer built signs. "Do not enter without permission." "Foals resting, please respect their space." But they didn't work. One afternoon, he found a woman trying to lift Rain for a photo. Rain squealed, Echo charged the gate, and Sawyer lost it. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply opened his phone, posted one last message, and turned everything off. "The ranch is closed to visitors. The twins are not entertainment. Please let them grow in peace." Sarah stood beside him as he hit post. She didn't say anything, but she placed her hand on his shoulder, firm and proud. For a while, things quieted. The media faded. The ranch healed, but the box from Pine Bend stayed on the desk in Sawyer's room, unopened. Until the night of the rain. A soft storm swept through Amarillo again, lighter this time. Sawyer sat in the barn with Echo while Flint and Rain slept beside her. He opened the book from Juniper, read a few pages, then flipped it shut. He picked up his old leather journal, the one filled with signs and symptoms and prayers. He opened to a blank page, and he began to write. Summer came early to the high plains of Amarillo. The wind, once cool and playful, now carried heat in its bones. The golden grass that blanketed Lone Creek Ranch swayed under skies so wide they looked like oceans turned upside down. It had been almost a year since the night Echo gave birth to Flint and Rain. 1 year since a storm, a miracle, and a boy's quiet defiance changed everything. The ranch had returned to a rhythm. Not the same one it used to have, quieter, more private, but steadier. Sawyer Lane, tall and spare as a cottonwood, still rose before the sun and ended each day with her hands in the soil. She planted more herbs that year, kept chickens again, and added a porch swing where she and Sawyer sometimes sat without needing to speak. Her calm had deepened into something softer, more rooted. She smiled more now, especially when Sawyer read her parts of the manuscript aloud at night. But peace didn't come without new storms. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a call from Reed Holloway, a local vet tech in his 20s who worked under Dr. Hellman. Reed had short auburn hair, pale eyes that never missed a detail, and a tendency to speak fast when nervous. That morning, he didn't waste words. "There's an outbreak," he said. "Equine influenza. It's moving fast. Starts with a dry cough, then spreads like wildfire." Sawyer froze. "Where?" "First case was south of Lubbock, but it's in Amarillo now. 2 ranches confirmed." Sawyer hung up and didn't stop moving for the next 12 hours. He isolated Echo, Flint, and Rain immediately. The east barn became their temporary shelter. He lined the entryways with disinfectant mats, wore gloves, washed boots with bleach. Sarah helped without needing explanation. They cleaned water troughs, replaced bedding, and kept all animals separate. Charlie, now 7, took up post just outside the barn, lying like a sentry with ears twitching at every sound. Then Echo coughed. It was soft, almost like a sigh. But to Sawyer, it rang louder than a gunshot. He sat by her side all night, his body tense, journal forgotten on the hay beside him. He whispered to her, stroked her thick neck, monitored her temperature with shaking hands. He didn't sleep. By morning, the cough had worsened. Sarah called Dr. Hellman, who was now overwhelmed with cases. He sent Reed instead. Reed arrived in a dust-covered truck, stepping out with a mobile kit slung over his shoulder and a set jaw. He moved quickly, checking Echo's lungs, taking samples, administering fluids. "She's not out of the woods," Reed muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "But she's strong. Let's hope that counts for something." Sawyer stayed with her for 4 days straight. Rain never strayed far, often curling beside her mother with a kind of silent wisdom. Flint, confused and anxious, paced in circles, snorted at shadows, kicked at the stall when Rain didn't follow. Sawyer watched it all, heart caught in his throat. But then Echo's cough lessened, her eyes brightened. On the 5th morning she neighed softly, low and even. Sawyer cried in relief, forehead pressed to her shoulder. The Foals remained clear. 2 weeks later, the barn was quiet again, and the threat had passed. They had survived once more. A year is a strange thing. It feels like forever when you're waiting for a life to be born, and like a breath when you look back. Flint and Rain had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Flint had grown into a whirlwind. A yearling with long legs and muscles like coiled rope, he ran for the sheer joy of it. Across the pasture, through low brush, into the wind like he was racing the sky itself. His coat was darker now, almost black, with that same flame mark on his forehead, a wild brand no storm could erase. He was quick to challenge boundaries, test fences, nip at Charlie's tail. But he also had a deep loyalty to Sawyer, always the first to come when called, always the last to leave. Rain was his opposite in every way. Graceful and light-footed, she rarely galloped but watched everything. Her coat had lightened into a silvery gray, soft as morning mist. She preferred moving close to Echo, mimicking her mother's pace, observing Flint with a quiet amusement. She was clever, figuring out how to unlatch her stall gate before her brother, learning Sawyer's whistle before he even knew he'd taught it. Where Flint was fire, Rain was water, and both, in their own way, were free. Sawyer watched them every day from the fence line, sometimes with Sarah, sometimes alone. He had never planned for this life. He thought he'd leave Amarillo one day, maybe after school, maybe for college or something bigger. But now, watching the Foals tear through the sunlight like they'd been born of it, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The book had taken months. Pages poured out of him late at night, in the barn, on the porch, or leaning against the fence with Charlie at his feet. It wasn't just about the twins. It was about loss, about Echo, about his dad, about what it meant to fight for something no one else believed in. He called it When the Wind Chose Us. Juniper Beck loved it. The publisher fast-tracked the manuscript, and now copies were already at the printers. But Sawyer didn't care about that. He cared about what the story meant, about what it preserved. One evening, as the sun bled into the prairie, Sawyer sat on the fence, legs dangling, journal in his lap. Sarah brought out lemonade and sat beside him. "Almost didn't recognize those two," she said, watching Flint rear up and bolt after a butterfly. "They're different now," Sawyer said, "but still the same." Sarah looked at him. "Like you?" Sawyer didn't answer. He just watched Rain walk slowly to the top of the hill and stop, looking out over the horizon, as if she understood something no one else could. The breeze lifted her mane, and then Sawyer whispered, not to his mother, not even to himself, but to the air. "Just believe, that's all it takes." In the quiet corners of life, on wind-swept farms, in small choices made without applause, we often find the truest kind of courage. Sawyer didn't set out to be a hero. He simply chose to believe when others doubted. He chose to stay when others walked away. And in doing so, he protected not just two fragile lives, but the peace, hope, and strength that come from trusting love over fear. In daily life, we're all faced with moments that ask us to stand firm for what we believe in. Whether it's caring for someone we love, following a dream no one else understands, or simply choosing kindness when it's not the easy option. This story is a reminder that faith, no matter how small, can carry us through the storm. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the quiet heroes among us.